"I'm starving for a man's touch," said the giant Apache girl to the lone farmer. The land was wide and quiet, stretching farther than the eye could see. Dry fields met open sky, and the wind carried dust instead of voices. This was a place where people lived far apart, not just in distance, but in their hearts. In this lonely farming region, everyone knew everyone's name, yet very few truly knew each other's lives. On the edge of this community lived a woman people noticed the moment they saw her. She was tall, much taller than most women, and strong in a way that came from years of hard work, not from show. Her shoulders were broad, her steps firm, and her presence impossible to ignore. She was Apache, proud of her roots, carrying generations of history in her blood. But to the people around her, she was often reduced to just one thing: different. She did not dress to attract attention. She wore simple clothes suited for work, long sleeves, sturdy boots, hair often tied back to keep it out of her face. Her hands were rough from labor, her skin marked by sun and wind. She worked wherever she could find honest work, often jobs others did not want. She fixed fences, helped with heavy lifting, and did seasonal labor when needed. She never complained. She never begged. Yet no matter how useful she was, how kind she remained, people kept their distance. Some stared, some whispered, some avoided her completely. Children sometimes looked at her with curiosity, while adults pulled them closer, unsure how to explain her presence. She felt those looks every day, like invisible hands pushing her back into a corner she never chose. She lived alone in a small place just beyond the main road. It was quiet there, especially at night. When the sun went down and the work was done, silence filled the rooms. No voices, no laughter, no warmth from another person nearby, just the sound of wind against the walls and the weight of another empty evening. She had learned to survive alone. She had been alone most of her life. Growing up, she had always been bigger than others her age. Taller, stronger, harder to ignore. Teachers did not know what to do with her. Other children either feared her or dared each other to make fun of her. She learned early that standing out often meant standing alone. By the time she became an adult, loneliness felt familiar, almost normal. But familiarity did not make it easier. She was not cold. She was not without feeling. Inside her was a deep well of emotion she rarely showed. She wanted what most people wanted but were too afraid to admit out loud: connection, understanding, and the comfort of another human being who did not look at her as a problem to solve or a curiosity to examine. She carried that want quietly, like a secret she was afraid to touch. Not far from her place lived a man who had chosen a life of distance long before she ever came into the picture. He was a farmer, lean from years of physical work, his face lined by sun and time. His land was not large, but it was enough to keep him busy from morning until night. Crops, animals, repairs. His days were full, even if his life was not. He lived alone, too. Years ago, he had known love, or at least something close to it. Loss followed soon after. Since then, he had kept his world small. Work was easier than people. Land did not ask questions. Animals did not judge. Silence, though heavy, was predictable. He woke before dawn each day, worked until his body ached, ate simple meals, and went asleep early. On the surface, his life looked stable. Inside, it was empty in a way he rarely admitted to himself. He had seen the tall Apache woman before, of course. Everyone had. He noticed how people shifted when she walked by, how conversations softened or stopped altogether. He noticed how she never reacted, never challenged the looks, never demanded space even though she deserved it. But noticing was not the same as approaching. For a long time they existed in the same space without sharing it. Passing glances, distant awareness, nothing more. Until one afternoon changed that. The day was hot, the kind of heat that pressed down on everything and slowed the body. The farmer was struggling with a broken fence post at the edge of his property. The ground was hard, the wood heavy, and his strength was not what it used to be. He worked in silence, sweat dripping down his neck, frustration building with every failed attempt. She happened to be walking by on her way back from a long day of work. She noticed him struggling, just as she had noticed many others struggle before. Usually, she kept walking. Helping often came with awkward silence or forced politeness that made things worse. But something made her stop this time. Maybe it was the way he looked genuinely stuck. Maybe it was the absence of fear in his posture. Or maybe it was simply that she was tired of passing by life without touching it. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. Without saying much, she offered help. Her voice was calm, steady, with no hint of expectation. The farmer hesitated. Pride fought practicality, but exhaustion won. Together they lifted the post and set it in place. Her strength made the work easier, faster. When it was done, he thanked her, genuinely surprised, not by her strength but by how natural the moment felt. They stood there for a second longer than necessary. There was no rush to leave. No sharp edges in the silence. That small pause mattered. They spoke a little more. Nothing personal, just work, weather, the land, simple words exchanged without tension. For her, it felt strange in a good way. For him, it felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a space he had avoided for years. When she finally left, both carried something new with them. For the woman, it was the feeling of being useful without being judged. For the farmer, it was the realization that connection did not always come with pain. Over the next few days, they crossed paths again, once at a supply store, another time near the fields. Each meeting was brief but warmer than the last. Words came easier. The distance between them slowly shrank, not in steps but in comfort. She noticed he looked at her face when she spoke, not her height. He listened not out of politeness but interest. That alone felt rare. He noticed her quiet humor, the intelligence behind her calm eyes, the way she chose her words carefully as if every sentence mattered. Still, both were careful. She had learned not to expect too much. Hope had disappointed her before. He had learned not to open doors he might not be able to close. But loneliness has a way of pushing people toward moments they cannot ignore forever. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft with fading light, they found themselves talking longer than planned. The workday was done, the air had cooled. The world felt less heavy for a brief moment. It was then that she said something honest, something that had lived inside her for years without voice. Not loudly, not dramatically, just plainly, like stating a simple truth. Those words would stay with him long after the night ended, and neither of them would walk away unchanged. The evening air was cooler than the day, carrying a quiet stillness that made every sound feel louder. Crickets began their steady rhythm, and the last light of the sun rested gently on the land. The farmer leaned against the fence he had fixed earlier, wiping his hands on his worn cloth. He thought the conversation would end there, as most did. A few polite words, a nod, and then each person returning to their own silence. But she did not turn away. She stood there, looking out at the fields, her arms relaxed at her sides. There was something different about her posture, as if she was carrying a thought too heavy to take with her. The farmer noticed it but did not push. He had learned that forcing words often broke moments that were meant to stay whole. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she breathed in slowly, as if gathering courage she had not used in a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but softer than before. She did not speak with shame. She did not speak to shock him. She spoke the way someone speaks when they are tired of hiding the truth. Her words were simple, honest, deeply human. The farmer felt them land in his chest like a weight he did not know how to move. Not because they were inappropriate, but because they revealed a loneliness he recognized too well. He did not hear a demand or an invitation. He heard pain. He heard honesty. He looked at her then, really looked at her. Not her height, not her strength. Not the way others described her. He saw a person standing alone at the edge of her own life, brave enough to say what most people never would. For a moment, he did not know how to respond. Silence returned, but it was not uncomfortable. It was full, heavy with meaning. She expected him to pull away. She had seen that reaction before. People either laughed nervously, changed the subject, or stepped back as if honesty itself were dangerous. She had prepared herself for that familiar outcome, but he did none of those things. Instead, he spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. He told her he understood loneliness more than he liked to admit. He did not pretend to have answers. He did not promise anything. He simply acknowledged what she had said as real. That alone surprised her. They continued talking, but the tone had changed. The surface was gone. This was no longer small talk about weather or work. It was two people standing in the open, without armor. She spoke about growing up feeling out of place everywhere she went. How even within her own community she often felt too much of something and not enough of something else. Too tall, too strong, too quiet, too different. She learned early to shrink herself emotionally because she could not shrink physically. She spoke about watching others form families, relationships, friendships, while she remained on the outside. She was not angry. She was tired. Tired of being invisible in a world that never stopped looking at her. The farmer listened without interrupting. He had spent years avoiding deep conversations, yet here he was, standing still, letting her words reach him. He recognized pieces of himself in her story. Different reasons, same outcome. Isolation. He shared his own past carefully, without going into details he was not ready to face. He spoke about loss, about choosing work over people because work never left. He admitted that silence had become both his comfort and his prison. The night deepened around them. Stars began to appear one by one. Neither noticed the time passing. At some point he offered her a glass of water. It was a simple gesture, but it carried meaning. An invitation without pressure. Respect without expectation. She hesitated only briefly before accepting. Inside his small house, everything was plain, clean but lived in, tools near the door, a simple table, one chair more worn than the other. It was clear he did not often have guests. She sat carefully, aware of her size in the small space. He noticed and moved things aside without comment, making room without drawing attention to it. That small act stayed with her more than she expected. They sat across from each other, the space between them comfortable, not charged. They talked more, sometimes in words, sometimes in quiet understanding. There was no rush, no hidden meaning, just presence. For the farmer, the evening felt strange. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. He realized how long it had been since he had shared space with someone without feeling the need to protect himself. He felt exposed, but not unsafe. For the woman, the night felt like stepping into a life she had watched from afar. Being listened to without judgment felt almost unreal. She kept waiting for the moment to break, for the shift that would tell her she had said too much. It did not come. When she finally stood to leave, it was late. The world outside was quiet, wrapped in darkness and stars. At the door they paused. Neither knew how to end the evening. He thanked her for helping earlier. She smiled, a real smile this time, not the guarded one she usually wore. They did not touch. They did not make promises. They did not speak of tomorrow. But something had changed. As she walked back to her place, her thoughts were restless. She replayed the conversation again and again, searching for signs she might have misread. Yet all she found was honesty. She felt lighter but also vulnerable. Opening up always came with risk. The farmer stood at his door long after she left, listening to the quiet return. His house felt different now. Smaller, maybe, or emptier in a way he could no longer ignore. Over the next days, neither of them spoke about that night, but it lived between them. Their meetings became more frequent, yet never forced. Sometimes it was a shared task. Sometimes just a few words exchanged under the sun. People noticed. Some watched with curiosity, some with suspicion. The woman felt those eyes again, but this time she was not alone with them. The farmer became more aware of how the community treated her. He noticed the pauses in conversation when she arrived, the careful distance people kept. What once blended into the background now stood out sharply. It unsettled him. He found himself defending her in small ways, speaking her name when others avoided it, acknowledging her presence openly. These actions seemed minor, but in a place like this they mattered. For her, each small act of recognition chipped away at years of quiet hurt. She did not expect miracles. She did not dream of sudden change, but she felt something steady forming beneath her feet. Still, doubt remained. Late one afternoon, as they worked side by side repairing equipment, she asked him a question she had been holding back. She asked if he felt uncomfortable around her, if her honesty had crossed a line. He stopped what he was doing and answered without hesitation. He said the honesty had not made him uncomfortable. It had made him think about his own walls, about how much life he had kept at a distance. That answer stayed with her. As days turned into weeks, the connection deepened quietly. No grand gestures, no dramatic moments. Just shared time, mutual respect, and growing trust. But not everyone was comfortable with it. Whispers grew louder. Assumptions formed. The woman felt the familiar pressure return, the sense that something fragile might be taken away simply because it existed. The farmer felt it too. The choice he had avoided for years was slowly taking shape in front of him, and soon he would have to decide whether he was willing to stand openly beside her or retreat back into the safety of silence. That question waited for him, heavy and unavoidable, as the quiet land watched on. The days began to move differently after that. Nothing dramatic happened at first, but small changes slowly shaped their routine. The woman started helping the farmer more often. Sometimes he asked, sometimes she offered, and sometimes it happened without words at all. She would see a task that needed an extra pair of hands, and she would step in. He stopped pretending he did not need help. Work created a natural rhythm between them. Fences, tools, animals, long rows of land that needed care. Side by side, they moved with ease. There was comfort in shared effort, in knowing when to speak and when silence was enough. For the woman, these moments were grounding. She felt useful in a way that did not reduce her to strength alone. The farmer asked her opinion, listened to her ideas, trusted her judgment. That trust mattered more than praise. It told her she belonged in the space they were creating together. For the farmer, her presence changed the shape of his days. The land felt less heavy. The hours passed faster. He noticed himself laughing more, sometimes at simple things, sometimes at her quiet humor that caught him off guard. He had forgotten what it felt like to enjoy someone's company without fear of losing it. They shared meals now, simple ones. Bread, soup, whatever was ready after a long day. They sat at the same table where once he had eaten alone, staring at empty space. Conversation flowed more easily. They talked about small things, stories from her childhood, memories from his younger days, moments neither had shared with anyone else before. Still, both were careful. She did not assume more than what was shown. Years of disappointment had taught her to protect her heart. She reminded herself often that kindness did not always mean commitment. He, too, held back. Loss had trained him to move slowly, to question happiness when it arrived quietly. He worried that letting himself feel too much might lead him back to pain he was not sure he could carry again. Yet despite their caution, something steady was forming. The woman began to notice changes in herself. She slept better. Her shoulders felt lighter. The loneliness that once sat heavily in her chest loosened its grip. She still lived alone, still faced the world as she always had, but now there was someone who saw her, someone who knew her voice and waited for it. The farmer noticed changes too. He caught himself thinking about her during the day, wondering if she had eaten, wondering how her work had gone. These thoughts surprised him. He had trained himself for years not to think beyond his land. The community, however, was watching closely. People noticed how often she was at his farm. They noticed how he spoke to her openly without embarrassment. Some were curious, some were uneasy. Old ideas and quiet judgments stirred beneath the surface. The woman felt it first. At the supply store, conversations paused when she walked in. Eyes followed her, then shifted toward the farmer if he was with her. Smiles were polite but thin. She had lived with this kind of attention her whole life, but now it felt sharper, closer to something she could lose. She began to pull back slightly, careful not to cause trouble for him. She offered less help, left earlier in the evenings, kept her distance in public. The old instinct to disappear returned. The farmer noticed. At first, he thought she was tired or busy. But the pattern continued. The warmth remained, but the closeness softened. It unsettled him more than he expected. One evening, as they worked quietly, he finally asked if something was wrong. He did not demand an answer. He simply asked honestly. She hesitated. This was a moment she knew well. Speaking the truth often came with consequences. But she had promised herself she would not retreat without trying. She told him she did not want to bring trouble into his life. She said she was used to being the reason people whispered. She did not want him to carry that weight. Her words struck him deeply. He realized then how different their experiences had been, even though they shared loneliness. His solitude had been chosen. Hers had been forced on her by others, fear and misunderstanding. He told her quietly that she was not trouble. He said if people whispered, that was their burden, not hers. He admitted he had noticed the looks too, and that pretending not to see them no longer felt right. That was the first time he openly acknowledged the pressure around them. For the woman, hearing him say those words brought both relief and fear. Relief that she was not alone in noticing. Fear that this road might demand more courage than either of them expected. As weeks passed, their bond deepened in ways that did not need explanation. They understood each other's moods. They noticed when silence meant comfort and when it meant something heavier. They shared responsibility without keeping score. The farmer began to defend her more openly. When someone spoke around her instead of to her, he redirected the conversation. When someone referred to her indirectly, he used her name. These actions were quiet but powerful. Some people respected it, others did not. One afternoon, a comment was made in passing, careless and unkind. It was not shouted, it was not dramatic, but it carried years of old thinking in a few simple words. The woman heard it. She felt the familiar sting, sharp and quick. Her instinct was to ignore it, to keep moving as she always had. But the farmer stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply corrected the tone, firmly and calmly. He made it clear that disrespect was not acceptable in his presence. The moment passed quickly, but its impact did not. For the woman, it was the first time someone had stood up for her without being asked. Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because it felt right to him. She thanked him later quietly. He shrugged it off, but inside, he knew something had shifted. He had crossed a line he had avoided for years. Silence was no longer an option he could live with comfortably. That night, both lay awake in their separate homes, thinking. She wondered what it meant to be chosen, even in small ways. She wondered if she was ready to trust that feeling, or if it was safer to keep her heart guarded. He wondered how far he was willing to go, whether he was prepared to face open judgment, not just whispers. Whether he was strong enough to protect something fragile without losing himself. Neither had answers yet, but the path forward was becoming clearer, even if it was uncertain. The land around them remained the same, wide, quiet, patient. Seasons shifted slowly. Work continued. Life moved forward whether they were ready or not. What they were building was not loud. It was not rushed. It did not follow anyone else's expectations. It was two lonely lives learning how to stand closer together. And soon, the world around them would demand to know where they stood. The change did not come all at once. It arrived in small moments that added weight to the air around them. The farmer felt it when people stopped speaking freely in his presence. The woman felt it when invitations she never received before suddenly came with unspoken limits. The land stayed quiet, but the community did not. They continued working together, but the outside pressure grew heavier. Where once there had been curiosity, there was now judgment. Some people acted friendly but distant. Others no longer hid their discomfort. It was not loud, but it was constant, like a low sound that never stopped. The woman carried this weight with practiced strength. She had lived under it for years, but this time it was different. Now her presence affected someone else's life. That thought troubled her more than any stare ever had. One evening, after a long day, she did not stay for supper. She packed her tools and left quietly, avoiding his eyes. The farmer noticed. He felt the shift immediately. Later that night, he stood alone in his kitchen, staring at the empty chair across from him. He understood then what was happening. She was pulling away again, not because she wanted to, but because she believed it was the right thing to do. That understanding unsettled him deeply. The next morning he found her early, working alone on her own land. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her or turn the moment into a confrontation. When she saw him, she stopped what she was doing but did not speak. He told her he missed her company the night before. His words were simple, but they carried meaning. He said the quiet felt heavier without her. She looked down at the ground, struggling with what she wanted to say. Finally, she admitted she was afraid. Afraid that staying close to him would make things harder for him. Afraid that people would judge him for standing beside her. Afraid that she would become a burden in his life. Her voice did not shake, but her eyes did. The farmer listened, feeling the truth of her words. He knew she was not imagining the tension. He felt it too, but he also knew something else now. Walking away would hurt more than standing firm. He told her he had lived most of his life avoiding discomfort, avoiding conflict, avoiding choices that required courage. He said meeting her had made him realize how small his world had become. He admitted that he was scared too, scared of being talked about, scared of being misunderstood, scared of losing the fragile peace he had built for himself. Then he said something that surprised them both. He said peace without connection was not peace at all. Those words stayed between them, heavy and honest. From that day on, he changed, not in loud ways but in clear ones. He stopped adjusting his behavior to make others comfortable. When she was with him, he treated her the same in public as he did in private. He stood beside her openly. He spoke to her directly. He did not explain or defend himself unless necessary. The community noticed. Some people pulled back completely. Others tested him with comments, waiting to see if he would retreat. He did not. Each time, he remained calm but firm. He refused to let disrespect pass as humor or tradition. The woman watched this with mixed emotions. Gratitude and fear walked hand in hand inside her. She admired his courage, but she worried about the cost. One afternoon, tension reached a breaking point. A small gathering had formed near the supply store. Nothing official, just neighbors talking. The woman stood slightly apart, as she often did. She listened more than she spoke. A comment was made, casual, dismissive, framed as a joke. It reduced her to a symbol instead of a person. For a split second, everything felt familiar. The old instinct to stay quiet, to let it pass, rose in her chest. But before she could decide, the farmer spoke. His voice was steady, not angry, not loud, but clear enough that everyone heard. He said she deserved respect. He said her presence harmed no one. He said that judging someone without knowing them said more about the speaker than the person being judged. The gathering fell silent. No one argued. No one laughed. Some looked away. Others stared at the ground. The moment passed quickly, but it changed everything. The woman felt something break open inside her, not pain but release. For the first time in her adult life, someone had stood beside her in front of others without apology. Later that evening, they walked back together. The sky was wide and calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. But inside them, everything had shifted. She asked him why he did it, why he chose to speak when staying silent would have been easier. He told her the truth. He said he was tired of living a life shaped by fear. He said he did not want to look back one day and realize he had turned away from something real because of other people's opinions. She listened, feeling both seen and overwhelmed. She told him she was afraid of trusting happiness. Afraid that once she let herself believe in it, it would be taken away. He did not argue with her fear. He understood it too well. He simply said that avoiding loss also meant avoiding life. They stood there for a long time, the quiet wrapping around them like a promise and a challenge. That night, neither slept easily. The woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small home. Memories surfaced, moments when she had hoped before, only to be reminded of her place at the edges. She wondered if this time was different or if she was repeating an old pattern. The farmer lay awake too, listening to the sounds of his land. He knew he had crossed a point of no return. There was no going back to the life he had before. He did not regret it, but he understood the weight of the choice. In the days that followed, reactions came. Some neighbors softened. They spoke to the woman more directly, curious now instead of cautious. Others remained distant, holding onto old views. The farmer did not try to change everyone's mind. He focused on consistency, on living the choice he had made without explanation. The woman noticed the shift in herself as well. She stood a little straighter. She spoke a little more freely. She did not disappear when attention turned toward her. Yet she also knew this was not the end of the challenge. Standing together openly had changed the balance. It had invited questions, resistance, and expectations neither of them could ignore. What they had now was real, but it was still fragile. And the next step would require even more honesty about what they wanted, what they feared, and whether they were ready to build something lasting in a world that had already tested them so much. That question waited quietly, like the land itself, patient and demanding an answer. The days after that moment felt calmer on the surface, but deeper underneath, both of them were changing. The loud tension had faded, yet the quiet questions remained. They did not rush to answer them. Life continued as it always had, work at sunrise, long afternoons under the open sky, evenings that slowly cooled into night. But now those routines held something new. They spent more time together, not because they planned it, but because it felt natural. Some mornings, she arrived early to help before he even asked. Other days, he walked over to her place just to check if she needed anything. These visits were simple, without big meaning attached to them, yet they carried warmth neither of them had known in years. They talked more openly now, not just about the past but about the present, about how the pressure from others made them feel, about the fear that still lived quietly inside both of them. They did not pretend to be stronger than they were. Honesty had become their ground. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sky change colors, she spoke about her people, about stories passed down through generations. She spoke of strength that was not loud, of endurance shaped by time and loss. She explained how pride and pain often lived together and how carrying both could be heavy. The farmer listened closely. He realized then how much history she carried, not just in her name but in her way of being. Her calm strength was not accidental. It was learned, earned. He shared his own story more fully that night, about the life he once imagined, about the moment he decided to close himself off after loss. He admitted that he had confused isolation with safety for a long time. He said meeting her had made him question that choice. She did not interrupt. She did not offer solutions. She simply stayed present. That presence meant more than any advice. Slowly, the idea of a future began to take shape, not as a dream but as a possibility. They did not speak of it in grand terms. It appeared in small questions. What repairs needed to be done before winter? What crops might do better next season? Whether sharing work might make things easier for both of them. These were practical thoughts, but beneath them was something deeper, a quiet decision forming piece by piece. The community continued to watch, but the intensity softened. Some people adjusted. Familiarity replaced suspicion for a few. Others remained distant, but their silence no longer felt threatening. It simply was. The woman noticed that children no longer stared as much when she walked through town. A few even waved. Adults spoke to her more directly, not all, but enough to notice the difference. Change was slow, but it was real. The farmer noticed how his land felt different now. Not physically, but emotionally. The house no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt lived in. Even when he was alone, the emptiness did not press so hard. There were still difficult days, moments when a comment or look reopened old wounds. Days when doubt crept back in quietly. On those days, they did not argue or pull away. They acknowledged the weight and carried it together. One afternoon, after a long stretch of work, the woman stopped and looked at him seriously. She told him she had spent most of her life believing she had to accept whatever space others allowed her. She said she was still learning that she could choose more for herself. He told her he was still learning how to choose closeness without fear. That understanding brought them closer than any promise could have. As seasons shifted, their bond deepened into something steady and grounded. It was not dramatic. It did not follow anyone else's idea of how things should look. It was built on shared work, shared silence, and shared respect. They did not announce anything to the world. They did not feel the need to explain. Those who needed to know knew. Those who did not matter as much anymore. The woman found herself standing taller, not because she needed to prove anything, but because she felt anchored. She no longer felt like she was always bracing for rejection. She knew where she stood. The farmer found himself opening his home more. Not to everyone, but to life itself. He began planning again, thinking beyond the next task, the next season. He realized hope did not weaken him. It gave him direction. One evening, as the sun set low and the land glowed with soft light, they stood together quietly. No words were needed. The world felt wide but no longer empty. They both understood that challenges would continue. Life would not suddenly become easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments of pressure, moments when old fears tried to return. But they also understood something important now. They were no longer facing those moments alone. What they had built was not based on illusion or escape. It was built on reality, on seeing each other clearly and choosing to stay anyway. The woman, once known only for standing out, had found a place where she was simply herself. The farmer, once hidden behind silence, had found a reason to speak. Their story did not end with perfection. It ended with something better, belonging. And in that quiet, open land, two lonely lives had finally learned how to walk forward side by side.